October 5, 1944, near Over-Eselt, Netherlands. 5 aviators from No. 401 Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force, circled at altitude, their Spitfire Mach-9s shimmering in the afternoon light. Squadron leader Smith spotted it first, a flash of silver plunging toward Nijmegen at impossible speed. No propeller, no familiar silhouette, just a dart of metal slicing through the air faster than anything the Canadians had ever encountered in battle. The Me-262 jet fighter banked sharply, its exhaust tracing faint ribbons against the violet sky. For 3 years, Allied intelligence had murmured about German jet development. But rumor turned to reality in an instant, now screaming past at over 500 miles per hour. Smith keyed his radio, calling Flight Lieutenant Davenport, Flight Lieutenant Everard, Flying Officer Mai, and Flying Officer Sinclair into attack formation. What followed was aviation history's first confirmed destruction of a jet fighter by gunfire in aerial combat. More importantly, it marked the first fracture in what Nazi propaganda had hailed as an invincible wonder weapon. The Messerschmitt Me 262. Schwalbe had just exposed its fatal weakness. Within months, American P-51 Mustang pilots would turn that vulnerability into coordinated hunting operations, rendering the world's first operational jet fighter almost useless despite its groundbreaking design. The psychological shock of that first jet encounter echoed through Allied squadrons across Europe. Pilots who saw Me-262s understood immediately that air warfare had entered a new era. Captain Chuck Yeager of the 357th Fighter Group, stationed at RAF Leiston, listened to the intelligence briefings with growing unease. The German jet could reach 540 mph in level flight, while the P-51 Mustang maxed out at 437 mph. In a straight chase, the Me-262 was unreachable. The numbers were merciless. If the Luftwaffe deployed these aircraft in large numbers, with enough fuel and trained pilots, the strategic bombing campaign hammering German industry could face catastrophic losses. B-17, flying fortresses, lumbering through flak-filled skies at 101 Prude, would be easy prey for aircraft that could strike from any direction and vanish before escorts could react. For the first time since seizing air superiority, Allied commanders faced the possibility of losing it. But the Me-262's revolutionary design came with inherent flaws, born from the infancy of jet propulsion in 1944. The Junkers Jumo 004 axial flow turbojet engines represented a giant leap in aeronautical engineering, yet they were fragile and temperamental. Each produced roughly 1,880 pounds of thrust at 8,700 RPM, burning J2 synthetic fuel, made from brown coal, at double the rate of piston-driven fighters. The turbine blades, made from chromador alloy due to Germany's shortage of heat-resistant nickel and chromium, ran at temperatures that caused rapid metal fatigue. Under combat conditions, each Jumo 004B engine required overhauling after just 10 hours, and total replacement after 25 hours of use. This meant that after 3 or 4 missions, Me-262s needed new engines, a logistical nightmare German ground crews could never fully resolve. Worse still, the engine's sluggish throttle response created deadly tactical problems. Unlike piston engines that reacted instantly, the Jumo 04 had a dangerous delay. Push the throttle too fast and the turbines could overheat or catch fire. Pilots had to adjust power with surgical precision, waiting precious seconds for the engines to stabilize. In combat, those seconds often meant life or death. Takeoffs and landings magnified these weaknesses. With a wing loading of 294 kilowatts per square meter, far higher than other fighters, the jet required takeoff speeds above 110 mach and similarly fast landings. From brake release, it took nearly 30 seconds to reach flying speed, half a minute during which the Me-262 was a sitting duck, straight, slow, and unable to maneuver. Allied pilots who caught a jet on takeoff or approach found it almost defenseless. As Me-262s descended for landing, low on fuel after 60 to 90 minutes of flight, they became equally exposed, flying predictable patterns straight into the gun sights of waiting Mustangs. The same engines that gave them unmatched speed at altitude became liabilities near the ground. Allied intelligence. Officers at 8th Air Force Headquarters studied these patterns through late summer and fall of 1944. Aerial. Photography pinpointed. Me 262 bases at Akmer, Hessepi, Rheine, Lechfeld, and Munich-Rhein. Gun camera footage confirmed the jet's high-speed edge but also revealed its fatal low-speed frailty. Analysts realized that Me 262 pilots, having nearly drained their fuel, had no choice but to return to specific airfields, the only ones stocked with J-2 jet fuel. This created a strategic opportunity. If Mustangs could patrol near known jet bases, they could ambush Me 262s during takeoff or landing, their most vulnerable moments. The tactic demanded endurance, nerve, and precision, as these bases were surrounded by heavy flak defenses. But it was the only effective countermeasure for propeller-driven fighters. The Luftwaffe recognized this weakness immediately. Commanders built flak corridors along approach routes to Me 262 fields, dense walls of 88mm guns, 37mm cannons, and quad 20mm mounts to shield the jets. Elite piston fighters like the Focke-Wulf W-190D and rare Ta-152H were assigned to cover the jets during takeoffs and landings. Flight schedules were staggered, decoys deployed, and even autobahns converted into emergency runways. Yet, despite every precaution, one truth remained inescapable. The Me 262 still had to take off and land, and at those moments, it was utterly exposed. Lieutenant Urban Ben Drew of the 361st Fighter Group understood this better than most. The 21-year-old pilot from Detroit, already a veteran of missions deep over Germany, had encountered a jet earlier that month and filed a detailed report describing its astonishing speed and its crucial vulnerabilities. On October 7th, Drew was grounded and facing disciplinary action for performing an unauthorized victory role after a successful mission. His punishment vanished when intelligence reported a concentration of Me-262s at Akma Arad Drome in northwestern Germany. Drew's previous jet encounter made him the obvious choice to lead a fighter sweep against the base. He briefed his flight carefully, emphasizing that success required surprise, aggression, and accepting the risks of flying directly through German flak defenses. His wingman, 2nd Lieutenant Robert McCandless, would stay with him regardless of what happened. Drew's P-51 Mustang, coded E-2D and nicknamed Detroit, mislifted off from RAF Little Walden with full internal fuel and wing tanks, giving him nearly 4 hours of endurance. The weather over Germany that October afternoon was broken clouds with good visibility, perfect conditions for spotting aircraft against the ground. Drew led his flight toward Akma at 15,000 FT, scanning constantly for jet contrails or the telltale flash of sun on polished aluminum. As they approached the known jet base, he spotted them. 2 Me-262s positioned on the runway, engines already running, preparing for takeoff. Drew pushed his throttle forward and dropped into a dive, building speed and losing altitude rapidly. The Me-262s began their takeoff roll just as Drew's Mustang screamed past 400 meters in the dive. The lead jet, piloted by Oberfeldwebel Heinz Arnold, had reached perhaps 84 tourists when Drew opened fire from 800 Watts D, his 650 caliber machine guns converging on the accelerating target. Tracers walked up the runway and found the Me-262's right engine. Arnold's jet lurched as the engine disintegrated, but his airspeed was already too high to abort. The crippled Me-262 staggered into the air on one engine, completely unable to maintain altitude or accelerate. Drew closed to 400 YD and fired again, this time hitting the cockpit area. Arnold's jet rolled inverted and plunged into trees beside the runway, exploding on impact. The second Me-262, flown by Lieutenant Guard Cobert, had witnessed Arnold's destruction and attempted to abort his takeoff. But the jet's poor throttle response and high landing speed made rapid deceleration impossible. Cobert's aircraft was still. rolling at high speed when Drew pulled out of his first attack and immediately repositioned for a second pass. McCandless called warnings about flak as German gunners found their range. 88mm shells bursting around the attacking Mustangs in black puffs. Drew ignored the flak and dove again, firing a long burst into Cobbert's Me-262As it attempted to turn off the runway. Hits sparkled along the fuselage and both engines. The jet slowed, then erupted in flames as fuel tanks ignited. Cobbert managed to escape the burning wreck, but his aircraft was a total loss. In less than 2 minutes, Drew had destroyed 2 of Germany's most advanced fighters using tactics that would become standard. Doctrine for Allied pilots. The engagement demonstrated conclusively that technological superiority meant nothing during critical flight phases, and that aggression combined with precise timing could neutralize the Me-262 threat. Drew's gun camera jammed during the attack, providing no photographic evidence of his victories. His only witness, Mandless, was hit by flak during their escape from Acma and shot down, becoming a prisoner of war before he could corroborate Drew's claims. Without gun camera footage or witness statements, 8th Air Force Headquarters initially denied Drew's victory credits, a crushing disappointment after one of the war's most significant tactical achievements. Drew would not receive official recognition until 1983, nearly 40 years later, when German Luftwaffe archives were cross-referenced with American records. Luftwaffe ace Georg Peter Ed, who had been scheduled to lead the Me-262 formation that day, but whose aircraft suffered mechanical problems, confirmed that he witnessed a yellow-nosed P-51 dive on the Me-262 and destroy both jets. Eda could not read the name Detroit Miss painted on the Mustang's nose from his position on the ground, but his testimony was sufficient. The United States Air Force awarded Drew the Air Force Cross on May 12, 1983, presented by Secretary of the Air Force Vern Orr. Drew and his wife were flown from Johannesburg, South Africa to the ceremony via C-141 Starlifter. He remains the first and only Allied pilot to shoot down 2 jet aircraft in a single mission while flying a propeller-driven fighter. That same October 7, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemper of the 479th Fighter Group may have scored another Me-262 victory, though uncertainty remains. ZMP, one of the 8th Air Force's most experienced fighter leaders, attacked what he believed was ABF-109 during a mission over Germany. His gun camera footage was ambiguous, showing an aircraft that could have been either a Messerschmitt 109 or an Me-262. Post-war analysis suggested it was likely a jet, but the victory was never definitively confirmed. What mattered more than the specific victory claims was the emerging pattern. American fighter pilots were discovering that Me-262s, despite their revolutionary speed, could be defeated through tactical innovation. The key was refusing to engage jets in their element, high altitude, high-speed combat, and instead forcing engagements during vulnerable phases when speed advantage disappeared. Chuck Jagger encountered his first Me-262 exactly 1 month later on November 6, 1944, while leading a bomber escort mission near Acma, Germany. Jagger's P-51, named Glamorous Glen 3 after his wife Glennis was cruising at patrol altitude when he spotted Me-262 attempting to intercept the bomber formation. The jets made their pass with typical tactics, diving through the bomber stream at tremendous speed, firing briefly, then using their velocity advantage to zoom climb back to altitude before escort fighters could react. Jurger watched the jets disappear into clouds, apparently escaping clean. Standard doctrine said chasing M262s was futile, but Jurger made a calculated gamble. Those jets had to land somewhere, and they had to land soon because their fuel endurance was limited. He broke from the bomber formation and descended through the clouds, emerging at lower altitude near Acma Airfield. Below him, Jurger spotted a lone Me-262 in the landing pattern, gear and flaps extended, speed reduced to perhaps 150 mph rate as it lined up on final approach. The German pilot, focused on his landing, apparently failed to spot the Mustang diving on him from above and behind. Jorger pushed his throttle full forward and trimmed for maximum dive speed. The P-51 accelerated rapidly in the descent. Jorger, using gravity to boost his speed above 450 mph, he closed to 400 watt and opened fire, walking his tracers onto the Me-2C62's wings. Hits sparkled along the jet's left wing root and fuselage. The Me-262 pilot, probably wounded or killed by the initial burst, made no evasive maneuver. Jagger continued firing as he closed to point-blank range, pouring rounds into the jet's engines and cockpit. The Me-262's left wing folded upward. The jet rolled inverted and plunged into woods several hundred feet short of the runway threshold, exploding in a ball of orange flame. Jagger had no time to celebrate. Akma's defensive guns opened fire immediately, 88 mm shells bursting around his Mustang as he screamed across the airfield at high speed and treetop altitude. His only option was to fly straight down the runway, using speed to escape before the flak crews could adjust their aim. Tracers arced across the field from both sides. Some rounds fired from one side of the runway, actually hitting gun positions on the opposite side in the chaos. Jorger held his P-51 low and fast, cleared the fair end of the airfield, and pulled up hard, diving for the safety of a nearby valley. He had survived one of the most dangerous tactical situations in air combat, attacking an enemy airfield in daylight at low altitude. But he had also proven that Me-262s could be hunted and killed. Jagger later described the engagement with characteristic understatement. "First time I saw a jet, I shot it down. Not very sportsmanlike, but what the hell." Through late 1944 and into 1945, American fighter pilots refined their anti-jet tactics based on hard-won experience and carefully analyzed gun camera footage. The P-51 Mustang proved ideal for the mission because of its exceptional range and endurance. A Mustang with full internal fuel and towing drop tanks could remain airborne for more than 7 hours, giving pilots the ability to loiter near known jet bases for extended periods. When jets appeared, Mustang pilots used altitude advantage to dive on them, trading height for speed. In the dive, a P-51 could briefly approach or even exceed 500 mph, enough to catch Me-262s during their most exposed moments. Timing was paramount. Striking jets during their takeoff run demanded early detection and proper positioning before they gained sufficient lift. Catching them during their landing descent required patience, waiting for the precise moment when the aircraft was fully committed to its approach with flaps and landing gear extended. Fighter pilots developed a deep familiarity with Me-262 flight habits. Through continuous observation and careful, intelligent study, they discovered that the jets generally operated during morning and late afternoon sorties, when visibility was clear, but the angle of the sun often made visual tracking difficult for defenders. They also noted that Me-2C62s tended to fly in pairs or small groups, seldom alone, meaning that downing one aircraft often opened chances to engage others. German pilots, limited by scarce fuel, were unable to abort landings or attempt a second approach. Once an Me-262 committed to landing with minimal fuel, the pilot had no alternative but to proceed, no matter the danger. This psychological element offered Mustang pilots a vital edge. The jet pilot knew he was vulnerable, but could not disengage. The Mustang pilot knew his quarry could neither outrun nor evade once committed. The Luftwaffe's defensive countermeasures became increasingly advanced, yet core weaknesses persisted. Flak corridors grew thicker, with some approach routes protected by more than 100 guns of varying calibers. Fighter escorts, FW-190D and TA-152H, were specifically ordered to intercept Allied aircraft near jet bases under any circumstances. The Allied pilots who devised and executed tactics to counter the jet menace earned their place in aviation history not through superior machinery, but through tactical brilliance, bravery, and an unyielding refusal to yield advantage to a seemingly invincible adversary. Their achievements affirmed the enduring truth that human qualities, training, discipline, leadership, and resolve, can triumph over technological. inferiority when properly harnessed. The transformation from German confidence to Allied supremacy in the jet versus Mustang engagements occurred. In less than a year, from October 1944, when the first Me-262 was downed, to May 1945 when the final jet sorties ended. This swift reversal resulted not from any single cause, but from the cumulative effect of methodical exploitation of the Me-262's weaknesses, combined with relentless operational pressure that prevented the Luftwaffe from ever sustaining effective jet activity. Each Me-262 destroyed during takeoff or landing was one fewer to intercept bombers. Every pilot lost or captured represented experience that could not be replaced. Every successful Allied strike on jet airfields forced German operations to scatter and lose coordination. In the final months of Me-262 service, German pilots fought with mounting desperation as their tactical situation worsened. Fuel scarcity curtailed missions to only the most vital targets. Engine failures kept many aircraft grounded. Allied patrols turned every takeoff and landing into a deadly gamble. Constant base relocations further strained organization and morale. Still, some pilots flew until the war's closing hours, displaying extraordinary courage and professionalism in the face of hopeless odds. They understood victory was impossible, yet flew on, driven by duty, pride, and the faint hope that their sacrifices might still count for something. The story ended not with a climactic battle, but with a gradual collapse as Germany's military infrastructure crumbled in early May 1945. Me-262s were abandoned on runways, hidden in forests to avoid capture, or destroyed by their own crews to prevent Allied seizure. A few jets were surrendered intact. Most simply ceased flying. As fuel was exhausted and maintenance became impossible, the aircraft that once promised to sweep Allied bombers from the skies finished their lives, scattered and silent across Germany. Monuments to the gulf between technological promise and operational reality. The Mustang pilots who once hunted them returned home when the war ended, their mission fulfilled, their victory earned not by superior machines, but by ingenuity, discipline, and skill. Me-262 pilots were instructed to alter their landing routes randomly, varying altitude and direction to complicate interception. Some bases employed smoke generators to mask airfields during recovery operations. Even so, the hard arithmetic of jet operations could not be changed. Me-262s required specific bases, specialized fuel, and could stay aloft only for short durations. Allied fighters could saturate the skies around these bases, making an encounter almost certain. On February 25, 1945, the Mustangs of the 55th Fighter Group executed one of the most devastating demonstrations of these tactics at Geilstart Airfield. The strike was perfectly timed, arriving just as multiple jets began their takeoff runs. In the ensuing chaos, American pilots destroyed 6 Me-262s on the ground or during takeoff and damaged several others. The losses amounted to a substantial portion of that unit's available jets. Records show these aircraft belonged to KG-J-54, a bomber group re-equipped with jets but lacking proper fighter training. The 55th Fighter Group's assault proved that concentrated sweeps over jet bases during known operating hours could yield major results, albeit with high risk. Several Mustangs sustained damage from anti-aircraft fire, and success relied entirely on achieving total surprise. The psychological toll on German jet pilots was immense and cumulative. The Me-262 aviators were elite, carefully chosen, thoroughly trained, often seasoned veterans with extensive combat backgrounds. Initially, they held justified faith in their aircraft's revolutionary performance. Yet repeated losses during takeoff and landing bred an atmosphere of constant anxiety. Every departure and return carried the fear of ambush. Knowing that Allied fighters might be waiting, that escape was impossible once committed, and that their fuel was nearly spent. All of it weighed heavily on their minds and influenced their split-second decisions. The March 18, 1945 raid on Berlin showcased both the Me-262's promise and its ultimate failure to alter the war's course. A total of 1,221 Allied bombers escorted by 632 fighters struck the German capital in what became the final great air battle over Germany. Luftwaffe commandos assembled 37 Me-262s from Jagdgeschwader, 7 for a coordinated strike, the largest jet force yet launched in a single action. Oberleutnant Gert Wagemann led his flight in a loose formation toward the bombers, firing R-4M unguided rockets in their first operational use. The 50mm rockets, mounted in underwing racks of 12, were designed to detonate near bombers, destroying them with blast and fragmentation rather than pinpoint accuracy. Wagemann's rockets tore into a formation of B-17s, reportedly bringing down several aircraft. Other Me-262 pilots pressed in with their 30mm cannons, their tremendous speed allowing multiple passes before Allied escorts could respond effectively. The encounter was short but intense. German pilots claimed 12 bombers and 1 escort fighter destroyed, though U.S. records list 8 heavy bombers lost and 3 Me-262s downed in return. The disparity reflected typical combat confusion and overclaiming. Even accepting German figures, the jets destroyed less than 1% of the attacking armada. The bombers still reached Berlin and delivered their payloads. The strategic bombing campaign continued unbroken. 5 American fighter pilots failed to return, and dozens of bomber crewmen were killed or captured, but Allied planners still deemed the mission a complete success. Former General of Fighters Adolf Galland, dismissed after disputes with Hermann Göring over air strategy, formed Jagdverband 44 in February 1945, an elite Me-262 unit composed of Germany's most distinguished aces. Its roster read like a roll of Luftwaffe legends, men with hundreds of confirmed victories. The group received top priority for aircraft, fuel, and maintenance. Germany's final attempt to field jets in meaningful strength. Galland himself flew combat sorties, scoring kills with both cannons and R-4M rockets. Others achieved successes against bombers and even Allied fighters when circumstances permitted. Yet Jagdverband 44's existence was measured in weeks. Allied bombing forced frequent relocations, chronic fuel shortages grounded aircraft, and persistent engine failures left half the unit's jets unserviceable. The operational record of the Me-262 ultimately revealed the gap between theoretical power and practical results. German archives show that around 1,243 Me-262s were built during the war, a technological marvel that arrived too late, too few, and too flawed to change its nation's fate. Of those manufactured, only around 200 to 300 ever saw combat operations. The remainder were destroyed on the ground by bombing, lost during training, or rendered unserviceable by maintenance problems. At no point did the Luftwaffe have more than 50 Me-262s operationally ready simultaneously, and typical daily availability was closer to 25 aircraft. This force faced Allied fighter strength exceeding 5,000 aircraft at any given time, plus thousands more bombers. The mathematics were insurmountable. Me-262 pilots claimed approximately 542 Allied aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat, though verification of these claims shows the usual wartime overclaiming by all sides. Post-war analysis by American researchers suggested actual losses to Me-262s were substantially lower. Allied forces destroyed Me-262 rates exceeding German production and training capabilities. American records credit P-51 Mustangs with 92.5 confirmed M262 shootdowns, though this number includes aircraft destroyed on the ground and during takeoff or landing, not just air-to-air engagements. The 357th Fighter Group, Chuck Jagger's unit, led American forces with 18.5 confirmed jet kills. The 55th Fighter Group claimed 17, while the 78th and 339th Fighter Groups each credited with 15. British forces, particularly Flying Hawker Tempests and Spitfires, claimed an additional dozen jet kills. The cumulative effect was that Me-262 losses exceeded replacements, and the operational force steadily declined despite production continuing until Germany's surrender. German ace pilots who flew the Me-262 offered mixed assessments of its effectiveness in post-war interviews. Georg Peter Ida, who scored 12 kills in the jet, including 9 P-51s, acknowledged that the aircraft's speed made high-altitude bomber interceptions relatively safe, but that Allied countermeasures increasingly negated this advantage. Walter Dahl, credited with 11 jet victories, including 6 Mustangs, emphasized that fuel limitations and engine reliability problems restricted tactical options to the point where the jet's theoretical superiority became largely irrelevant in practical operations. Henrik Barr, with 16 Me-262 kills from his total of 240 career victories, stated flatly that the jet arrived too late and in too few numbers to matter. France shall the type's probable top ace with 17 kills, including 6 four-engine bombers and 10 P-51s, was killed in action in April 1945. But his earlier reports emphasized the aircraft's inability to engage maneuvering fighters effectively due to its high approach speeds and wide turning radius. The tactical lessons learned from Me-262 operations influenced post-war jet fighter development worldwide. Allied engineers studied captured jets intensively, testing them at facilities in the United States and Britain. They confirmed that the basic design was sound, but that engine technology remained the critical limiting factor. Early American jets like the Lockheed P-80 and the Republic F-84, and Soviet designs like the MiG-15 incorporated solutions to problems identified in the Me-262. Longer engine life, better throttle response, improved fuel efficiency, and stronger airframes addressed the specific vulnerabilities that Allied fighters had exploited. American pilots who successfully engaged Me-262s became recognized experts within the fighter community, their combat reports studied carefully by intelligence officers and training instructors. Beyond Urban Drew and Chuck Jagger, dozens of other pilots scored jet kills through persistent application of the tactics developed through hard experience. These pilots shared common characteristics, including exceptional eyesight, precise gunnery skills, aggressive temperaments, and willingness to accept risks that more cautious pilots avoided. Attacking jet bases through dense flak required courage bordering on recklessness. Yet, these pilots repeatedly flew such missions because they understood the strategic importance of neutralizing the jet threat. The human cost of these engagements affected both sides severely. American fighter pilots killed during attacks on jet bases died far from home, often in fiery crashes after flak damage. Their bodies sometimes never recovered from crash sites in Germany. German Me-262 pilots, the elite of the Luftwaffe, were irreplaceable assets lost at rates that Germany's shrinking training program could not sustain. Each dead or captured German jet pilot represented hundreds of hours of training, millions of Reichsmarks in investment and tactical experience built over years of combat. The stress contributed to errors in judgment, accidents during takeoff and landing, and declining combat effectiveness even among experienced aviators. The infrastructure supporting Me-262 operations collapsed progressively through early 1945. As Allied armies advanced into Germany and strategic bombing intensified, specialized jet fuel became increasingly scarce as refineries were bombed or captured. Replacement engines already in short supply due to production bottlenecks became unavailable when factories were destroyed or fell to advancing forces. Spare parts for airframes and systems disappeared from supply chains. Trained maintenance personnel were killed in bombing raids or reassigned to infantry units as Germany grew desperate for soldiers. Airfields themselves came under direct ground attack as front lines moved eastward. By April 1945, Me-262 units were operating from sections of autobahn or improvised strips, hiding aircraft in woods and working with minimal supplies under constant threat of air attack. The final weeks of Me-262 operations in April and early May 1945 were characterized by sporadic sorties flown by scattered units operating independently, as central command and control disintegrated. Individual pilots flew missions when fuel was available, often attacking targets of opportunity rather than executing coordinated operations. Some pilots chose to fly their jets to Allied, held territory and surrender rather than continuing hopeless combat. Others flew final missions knowing that return would be impossible due to fuel shortages or airfield capture. A few, including members of Jagdverband Band 44, flew combat until literally the final days of the war, achieving kills even as Germany's military structure collapsed. Completely post-war analysis by American and British aviation experts reached consensus that the Me-262 represented a revolutionary technological achievement that arrived too late to affect the war's outcome, even if Hitler had not delayed production by demanding bomber variants, even if engine reliability had been better, even if more were produced. The fundamental strategic situation made the jet's impact limited. Germany in 1944 lacked fuel, lacked trained pilots, lacked air superiority necessary for safe operations, and faced overwhelming numerical disadvantage against Allied air forces. The Me-262 could not solve these problems regardless of its performance advantages. The legacy of the Me-262 versus Mustang engagements extended far beyond World War II, influencing air combat doctrine for generations. The fundamental principle that technological superiority does not guarantee tactical success became a case study taught at military MIs worldwide. The importance of exploiting enemy vulnerabilities rather than engaging strengths became embedded in fighter pilot training. The recognition that even revolutionary weapon systems have exploitable weaknesses informed military planning and procurement strategies throughout the Cold War and beyond. The specific tactics developed by American pilots to counter the Me-262 speed advantage using altitude to build speed and dives, timing attacks for vulnerable flight phases, and persistent patrolling of known enemy operating areas remained relevant as new generations of fighters with performance advantages emerged. Individual pilot accounts from the period provided rich detail about the psychological and tactical challenges of these engagements. Chuck Jagger, in his autobiography, and numerous interviews emphasized that destroying the Me-262 required accepting exceptional risk and making split-second decisions with imperfect information. He described the tension of loitering near German airfields, knowing that flak and enemy fighters would engage the moment he attacked. The calculation required to time his dive for maximum speed at the critical moment, and the satisfaction of proving that American fighters could defeat the seemingly invincible jets. Urban Drew, after receiving his belated recognition in 1983, spoke about the frustration of having his victories denied for nearly 40 years due to lack of corroborating evidence, but also about the importance of the mission regardless of personal recognition. The engineering lessons from Me-262 operations directly influenced the development of the P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter, which entered service just as World War II ended. Lockheed engineers studied captured Me-262s extensively, examining their engines, airframes, and systems to understand both successes and failures. The P-80's design incorporated longer-lasting engines with better throttle response, addressing the most critical Me-262 weakness. Improved fuel efficiency extended range beyond the Me-262's 652 M maximum. Stronger landing gear reduced the accident rate that plagued German jet operations. Better cockpit visibility enhanced pilot situational awareness during vulnerable takeoff and landing phases. Soviet designers similarly studied Me-262 technology with captured aircraft and engines shipped to research facilities where they were extensively tested. The information gleaned influenced designs like the MiG-15 and Yak-15, though Soviet engineers also incorporated British engine technology obtained through espionage and technology transfer. The global proliferation of jet fighter knowledge that resulted from Me-262 analysis accelerated the transition from piston to jet propulsion that dominated the late 1940s and 1950s. Within 10 years of World War II's end, Propeller-driven fighters had become obsolete for frontline service, replaced by jets in virtually every air force worldwide. The final accounting of Me-262 operations reveals an aircraft that achieved tactical successes but strategic failure. Individual pilots scored impressive kill totals, and specific missions demonstrated the jet's capabilities when conditions favored it. However, the cumulative impact on Allied air operations was minimal. Strategic bombing continued unabated. Allied fighters maintained air superiority and ground forces advanced into Germany with effective air support throughout. The resources devoted to Me-262 development and production, including scarce materials, manufacturing capacity, and skilled labor, might have produced more conventional fighters that could have been operated more effectively with available fuel and pilot training. The story of German pilots flaunting their jets, until Mustang aces caught them during vulnerable moments, is ultimately a story about the limits of technological solutions to strategic problems. Germany developed the world's first operational jet fighter, achieving a genuine breakthrough that should have provided significant tactical advantages. Yet, this accomplishment could not offset the fundamental disadvantages in manpower, resources, fuel supplies, trained crews, and overall strategic position. American and Allied aviators, flying aircraft that were less advanced but supported by immense industrial strength, extensive training programs, dependable logistics, and effective tactical doctrine, overcame the technological marvel through perseverance, creativity, and professional mastery. Ultimately, the Me-262 remains one of aviation history's most intriguing what-ifs, a machine that showcased the future yet arrived too late to reshape the past. Its combat record, though notable in certain encounters, was ultimately inadequate to influence the outcome of the war.